In the spring of 1925, a man walked into the most expensive hotel in Paris and sold the Eiffel Tower for scrap metal. He didn't own a single bolt of it, yet he walked out with a suitcase full of cash and a certified check worth millions. Then, a month later, he went back and tried to sell it again. This is the story of Count Victor Lustig, the most dangerous con artist in history. He tricked wealthy bankers, escaped from high-security prisons, and conned Al Capone without ever drawing a weapon. This story is 7 chapters long, spanning the golden age of crime, and it reveals exactly how one man convinced the world to buy a lie. Chapter 1. Victor Lustig sat in the first-class smoking lounge of the RMS Mauritania, watching the smoke from his cigar drift toward the ceiling. He was bored. To the other passengers, he looked like a wealthy Austrian count returning to Europe. He wore a tailored suit, a silk tie, and a monocle. He spoke quietly, and tipped the waiters with crisp, clean bills. But Victor Lustig wasn't royalty. He was a predator, and he was scanning the room for prey. He wasn't looking for the smartest man in the room, he was looking for the loudest. His eyes settled on an American businessman at the poker table. The man was flashy, wearing expensive jewelry, and laughing too hard at his own jokes. He was winning, and he wanted everyone to know it. Lustig smiled. He had found his mark. He didn't approach the man immediately. A good con artist knows you never chase the victim, you make the victim come to you. Lustig sat at the same table for 2 days, saying very little. He let the American win. He bought the man expensive brandy. He listened to the American brag about his factories and his success back home. Lustig played the role of the impressed European aristocrat perfectly, feeding the man's ego until the American felt like he was the most important person on the ship. By the 3rd day, the American was completely disarmed. He thought the Count was his best friend. That was when Lustig changed the dynamic. He started acting secretive. He would check his pocket watch nervously. He would decline invitations to dinner, claiming he had business to attend to in his cabin. The American's curiosity was piqued. He asked what kind of business a count could possibly have in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Lustig hesitated. He looked around the lounge to make sure no one was listening. Then, he leaned in close and whispered that he was carrying something dangerous. He wasn't traveling for pleasure. He was traveling to sell a device that the American government was desperate to keep secret. He invited the American to his cabin for a private demonstration, promising him that he was about to see the impossible. Inside the Count's private cabin, the curtains were drawn. On the small table sat a beautiful object. It was a box made of polished mahogany, fitted with intricate brass dials and a heavy steel crank on the side. It looked like a piece of scientific equipment from a laboratory. Lustig treated the box with extreme reverence. He put on a pair of white gloves. He explained to the American that this machine was a Romanian Box, a device capable of duplicating banknotes using a secret chemical process involving radium. He took a crisp $100 bill from his wallet and showed it to the American. He placed the bill into a slot on one side of the box. Then, he took a blank piece of high-quality paper and inserted it into a slot on the other side. Lustig turned the crank slowly. The machine hummed and clicked. The papers were pulled inside. Then Lustig stopped. He explained that the chemical reaction took exactly 6 hours to complete. For 6 hours, the 2 men sat in the cabin, drinking wine and waiting. The American was sweating with anticipation. He wasn't looking at a box. He was looking at a future of unlimited money. When the time was finally up, Lustig turned the crank again. From the bottom of the machine, 2 pieces of paper slid out. One was the original bill. The other was a wet, perfect copy of a $100 bill. Lustig picked it up by the corner. Careful not to smudge the fresh ink, he handed it to the American and told him to take it to the ship Espresso to verify it. The American ran to the bank office. The bill was real. Of course it was real. Lustig had preloaded the box with a genuine bill hours before. The American rushed back to the cabin, breathless. He didn't just want the box, he needed it. He offered $10,000. Lustig refused. He offered $20,000. Lustig sighed, acting as if he was partying with his own child. Finally, they settled on $30,000, a massive fortune in 1925. Lustig handed over the box and the secret chemicals. He gave the American strict instructions not to operate it for 12 hours, to let the mechanism cool down. By the time the American turned the crank 12 hours later and found nothing but blank paper inside, Victor Lustig was already off the ship. He was standing on a train platform in France, holding a suitcase full of cash, looking for a newspaper. He had conquered the ocean, and now he was ready to conquer Paris. Chapter 2. Victor Lustig arrived in Paris with $30,000 in his pocket and a plan to blend in with the elite. He didn't hide in a cheap apartment. He went straight to the Hotel de Crillon, a palace of stone and gold overlooking the Place de la Concorde. He booked a suite, tipped the doorman a week's wages, and ordered the finest champagne. He knew exactly what he was doing. In 1925, Paris was a city on its knees. The First World War had ended, but the bills were coming due. The government was unstable, the currency was crashing, and the streets were filled with people trying to scrape by. In this atmosphere of fear and poverty, a man who projected absolute wealth was treated like a king. People didn't check his background, they just wanted to be near his money. One rainy morning, Lustig sat in the hotel lobby, drinking coffee and scanning the newspapers. He wasn't interested in politics. He was looking for cracks in the system. He turned the page and found a small, angry article tucked away in the back section. The headline was about the Eiffel Tower. To us, the tower is a sacred monument. But in 1925, it was a rusting, peeling giant that many Parisians hated. It had been built for a temporary fair 30 years earlier, and it was never supposed to stay. The article complained that the tower was falling apart. It cost a fortune to paint. The elevators were broken, and the iron was corroding. The writer concluded with a furious suggestion. The government should stop wasting money on it, tear it down, and sell the metal for scrap. Lustig read the sentence twice. He looked out the window at the gray skyline. Most people saw a national monument. Victor Lustig saw 7,000 tons of iron that nobody wanted. He realized that the French government was so desperate for cash that the idea of selling the tower was untactually crazy. It was a logical solution to a budget crisis. He put down his coffee cup. He didn't need a money box anymore. He had just found the biggest prop in the history of crime. He was going to sell the Eiffel Tower, and he was going to use the government's own desperation to do it. To sell the biggest landmark in the world, Lustig couldn't just use his charm. He needed to be official. He dipped into the Parisian underworld and found a master forger to create his credentials. Within days, he held the keys to the city in his hands, official government stationery bearing the seal of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. The paper was heavy, the watermark was perfect, and the title under his name read Deputy Director General. Now he needed victims. Lustig knew he couldn't target the established titans of the French steel industry. Those men played golf with the real ministers. One phone call would expose the lie. He needed a specific type of prey. He needed men who had money but no status. He was looking for the new money, scrap metal dealers who were rich enough to write a check, but insecure enough to be blinded by the chance to work with the government. He scanned the business directories and selected 5 dealers who fit the profile. He typed 5 letters on his fake stationery. He marked them urgent and strictly confidential. The letters were masterpieces of manipulation. He didn't tell them what was for sale. He simply invited them to a private meeting at the Hotel de Crillon to discuss a government contract of national importance. He hinted that the matter was so sensitive it could not be discussed in a government office. He was baiting the trap with the 2 things these men craved most: secrecy and prestige. He dropped the letters in the mailbox, returned to his suite, and prepared to play the role of his life. Chapter 3. The 5 scrap metal dealers arrived at the Hotel de Crillon wearing their best suits, looking nervous. They were escorted up to a private suite where Victor Lustig was waiting. He didn't look like a con man. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the French Republic on his shoulders. He was pale, serious, and spoke in a hushed whisper. He sat them down and poured drinks, then locked the door. He told them that what he was about to say was a state secret. If word got out to the public, there would be riots in the streets. He laid it out simply. The government was broke. The Eiffel Tower was rotting. The cost to repair it was impossible. He told them that after long, painful debates, the decision had been made to quietly dismantle the tower and sell the 7,000 tons of iron to the highest bidder. The room went silent. It was an audacious lie, but Lustig sold it by using the dealers' own egos against them. He told them they had been selected because they were the most discreet and honorable businessmen in Paris. He made them feel like insiders. As he spoke, Lustig watched their faces. He wasn't looking for the smartest man. He was looking for the hungriest. His eyes settled on André Poisson. Poisson was different from the others. He was younger, sweating slightly, and nodding too eagerly at everything Lustig said. Poisson was an outsider in the Parisian business world. He had money, but he didn't have respect. He was desperate to make a deal that would put him in the big leagues. Lustig saw the insecurity radiating off him like heat. He knew immediately that this was his target. He ended the meeting by telling the men to submit their bids within 4 days. But as they left, he gave Poisson a subtle nod, a silent signal that said, "I want you to win." A few days later, André Poisson returned to the hotel alone. He was ready to make a deal, but he was terrified. His wife had planted a seed of doubt in his mind. She asked him why a high-ranking government official was conducting business in a hotel bedroom instead of a ministry office. It felt wrong. Poisson sat across from Lustig, sweating. He started asking hard questions. He wanted proof. He wanted to see more documents. The scam was teetering on the edge of collapse. A single wrong answer would send Poisson running to the police. But Victor Lustig didn't panic. He leaned back in his chair, let out a long, weary sigh, and decided to play the most dangerous card in his deck. He stopped talking about the tower and started talking about himself. He lowered his voice and confessed a secret. He told Poisson that being a government minister wasn't as glamorous as it looked. He complained that his salary was tiny. He talked about the pressure to dress well and entertain guests, and how he was drowning in debt. Poisson's eyes lit up. He suddenly understood everything. The secrecy, the hotel room, the urgency. It wasn't because the deal was fake. It was because the official was corrupt. In 1920s France, government corruption was a fact of life. Poisson knew how to deal with a crooked politician. That was just business. The confession didn't make him suspicious. It made him comfortable. He realized Lustig didn't just want to sell the tower, he wanted a kickback. Poisson smiled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He wrote a check for 70,000 francs for the tower, and then he pulled out a thick envelope of cassia, a massive bribe for Lustig personally. Lustig took the money with a steady hand. He handed over the impressive-looking and completely fake bill of sale. They shook hands. Poisson left the hotel beaming, believing he had just bought the Eiffel Tower and secured his place in history. Lustig didn't celebrate. He didn't even finish his drink. The moment the door clicked shut, he moved. He packed his bag, checked out of the hotel, and drove straight to the bank to cash the check. Within hours, he was on a first-class train speeding toward the Austrian border. He sat by the window, watching Paris disappear, a suitcase full of cash at his feet, waiting for the inevitable explosion when Poisson realized he had bought nothing but a stack of worthless paper. Chapter 4. Victor Lustig sat in a hotel room in Vienna, scanning the French newspapers every morning. He was waiting for the explosion. He expected to see his face on the front page. He expected headlines, screaming idiot businessman buys Eiffel Tower. He stayed inside, ready to run at the first sign of a police siren. But 1 week passed, then 2, then a month. There was nothing. The newspapers talked about politics and the weather, but there was not a single word about the Eiffel Tower. Slowly, the incredible truth dawned on him. André Poisson hadn't gone to the police. The embarrassment was too great. Poisson had realized that if he reported the crime, he wouldn't just be the man who lost money. He would be the laughingstock of Paris forever. He would be known as the fool who bought a monument from a stranger in a hotel room. To save his reputation, he had destroyed the fake documents and swallowed the loss in silence. Lustig realized he had committed the perfect crime. He had the money, and there was no investigation. A rational criminal would have taken the win, retired to a beach, and vanished. But Victor Lustig wasn't rational. He was addicted to his own brilliance. He looked at the silence in the papers and saw an invitation. Against all logic, he packed his bags and boarded a train back to Paris. He checked into the exact same hotel. He hired the exact same forger to print the exact same fake government documents. It was an act of breathtaking arrogance. He was betting his freedom on the belief that he was simply smarter than everyone else in the city. He found 5 new scrap metal dealers. He set up the meetings. He sat at the head of the table again, repeating the lie about the rusting tower. But this time, the atmosphere was different. He wasn't dealing with an insecure social climber like Poisson's. He was dealing with a man who asked hard questions. As Lustig pushed for the sale, he saw the dealer hesitate. The man didn't reach for his checkbook. He reached for his coat. He said he needed to consult the police prefect to verify the permits before signing anything. Lustig smiled and shook his hand, but his blood ran cold. He knew that look. It wasn't the look of a buyer. It was the look of a man who was setting a trap. The moment the dealer left the room, Lustig dropped the act. He didn't wait to see if he was right. He grabbed his emergency bag, left the hotel through a side door, and headed straight for the train station. He had pushed his luck one time too many, and now the hunt was on. Victor Lustig didn't just leave Paris. He fled the continent. He realized that his face was becoming too well known in Europe. He needed a new playground, a place where money was flowing freely and people were blinded by greed. He boarded a ship for the United States. America in the 1920s was a gold rush for a con man. Lustig swept through the Midwest, selling his money boxes to sheriffs, bankers, and businessmen. He made a fortune, but there was a problem. He was bored. After selling the Eiffel Tower, tricking a small-town sheriff felt like child's play. He missed the danger. He wanted to prove that he could outsmart the most terrifying people on earth. He set his sights on Chicago, and specifically on one man, Al Capone. This was a suicidal idea. Capone was not a businessman who would be embarrassed to call the police. Capone was a killer. If you stole from him, you didn't go to jail. You went into a hole in the desert. But Lustig saw Capone differently. He saw a man who was desperate for respectability. Just like the scrap dealers in Paris, Lustig traveled to Chicago and walked straight into Capone's headquarters. He didn't wear a disguise. He wore his finest suit, a fedora, and his monocle. He demanded a meeting. When he was brought into Capone's office, the room was thick with smoke and tension. Heavily armed bodyguards lined the walls, staring at this strange, fancy European. Capone sat behind his desk, suspicious. Lustig didn't flinch. He spoke with the calm arrogance of a count. He told Capone he had a sophisticated stock market scheme that could double an investment in 60 days. He didn't ask for a small loan. He asked for $50,000 cash. Capone stared at him. He was used to people trembling in his presence. He wasn't used to a dandy treating him like a business partner. Capone narrowed his eyes and said, "I'll give you the dough. But if you're scamming me, I'll have your head." He pulled a massive wad of cash from a safe, $50,000 in large bills and threw it on the desk. Lustig picked up the money, bowed politely, and walked out. He had just taken a fortune from a man who killed people for looking at him the wrong way, but Lustig didn't run. He went straight to a bank, rented a safety deposit box, and locked the money away. He didn't spend a cent, he just waited. He was playing a psychological game that no one else understood, and the clock was ticking. Chapter 5. The 2 months Victor Lustig spent in Chicago were the longest of his life. He sat in his hotel room, staring at the calendar. He wasn't investing the money, he was letting it sit in a safety deposit box. He was gambling his life on a single psychological insight: that a man as powerful as Al Capone was desperate for the one thing he could use by. When the 60 days were up, Lustig retrieved the cash and walked back to the Lexington Hotel, Capone's fortress. The atmosphere was suffocating. The lobby was filled with men in trench coats with bulges under their arms. When Lustig was ushered into Capone's office, the mob boss was waiting. Capone leaned back in his chair, expecting a profit. He asked, "Well, Count, did you double it?" Lustig didn't answer immediately. He took off his hat. He looked exhausted. He walked to the desk, hung his head, and delivered the line he had rehearsed 1,000 times. He said, "I am sorry, Mr. Capone. The market collapsed. The plan failed. There is no profit." The silence that followed was terrifying. Capone's face went cold. His bodyguards stepped forward, hands drifting toward their guns. In this room, losing the boss's money was usually a death sentence. Lustig stood there, waiting for the order that would end his life. Then, he reached into his coat. He pulled out the stack of bills, the original $50,000, and placed it gently on the desk. He said, "I lost the profit, but I saved the principal. Here is your money back, sir." Every penny. Capone froze. He stared at the cash, then at Lustig. He was confused. In his world, people stole, they lied, or they ran away. Nobody ever brought money back. Slowly, a smile spread across the gangster's face. He realized this Count was the only honest man he had ever met. He grabbed the stack, peeled off $5,000 a year salary for a normal man and shoved it into Lustig's hand. He shouted, "You're an honest guy. Buy yourself a drink." Lustig bowed, took the money, and walked out. He didn't exhale until he was 3 blocks away. He had survived the lion's den. Lustig left Chicago with $5,000 and a new realization. He was done with small cons. He was done risking his life for pocket change. He wanted to do something industrial. He needed a partner who was an artist, not a criminal. He found him in a dusty, cluttered workshop in Nebraska. His name was Tom Shaw. Shaw was a chemist who had spent his life obsessed with a single problem: the color green. He wasn't interested in spending money. He was interested in making it, literally. When Lustig walked into his shop and laid out his plan, Shaw didn't ask about the law. He asked about the funding. Lustig put Capone's money on the table. It was enough to buy the best equipment in the world. Together, they set up a laboratory that looked more like a government facility than a criminal hideout. Shaw began the work. He didn't just try to copy the ink. He broke it down at a molecular level. He solved the problem that had stopped every other counterfeiter. The paper's currency has tiny red and blue silk fibers woven into the cotton. It was impossible to buy, so Shaw invented a process to bleach real $1 bills until they were ghost white blank paper. Then, he used custom-made copper plates to print the design of a $100 bill onto the real paper. The first time Shaw handed a finished bill to Lustig, the Count held it up to the light. He rubbed it between his fingers. He smelled it. It cracked and snapped just like real money. It had the tiny fibers. It was perfect. Lustig smiled. He realized he wasn't holding a fake for all intents and purposes. He was holding a real $100 bill that just happened to be printed in Nebraska instead of Washington. He packed a suitcase with the fresh notes. The con was over. The invasion of the American economy was about to begin. Chapter 6. Victor Lustig stood in line at a betting window at a horse racing track in Kentucky. He was wearing a linen suit and holding a program, looking like any other gambler, but his hands were sweating. In his pocket was a crisp, brand-new $50 bill that had been printed in a basement in Nebraska. He reached the front of the line. This was the test. If the teller noticed the ink was too dark, or the paper felt wrong, Lustig would be in handcuffs in 60 seconds. He placed the fake 50 on the counter and asked for a $2 bet on a horse named Blue Sky. The teller picked up the bill. He rubbed it between his thumb and finger. He glanced at Lustig. Then, he opened the drawer, dropped the fake bill in, and counted out $48 in real, clean government cash as change. Lustig took the money and walked away without looking back. He had just turned paper into gold. He did this thousands of times. He moved across the country like a phantom, leaving a trail of perfect forgeries in his wake. In Washington, D.C., the Secret Service headquarters was in chaos. Agents were finding these supernotes in banks from New York to New Orleans. They put the bills under microscopes and couldn't find the flaw. They didn't know who they were looking for. They only knew that someone had declared war on the American economy. They nicknamed him the Ghost, and they ordered every agent in the field to find him before he destroyed the dollar. Victor Lustig thought he was untouchable. He had outsmarted the French government, Al Capone, and the banking system. But he made a fatal error. He forgot that he wasn't the only one capable of deception. He was traveling with his girlfriend, Billy May, but he was secretly seeing another woman on the side. When Billy May found out, she didn't scream, she didn't pack her bags. She walked to a payphone on a rainy afternoon and dialed the anonymous tip line of the Secret Service. She didn't ask for a reward. She simply said, "If you want the ghost, look on the corner of 72nd Street and Broadway." On May 10, 1935, Victor Lustig stepped out of his hotel into the bright spring sunlight of New York City. He was dressed in a gray suit and a fedora, carrying a briefcase. He looked like any other successful businessman on his way to a meeting. He stopped to buy a newspaper, unaware that the street was filled with men watching his reflection in shop windows. As he turned the corner, the trap snapped shut. Black sedans screeched to the curb, and men in trench coats swarmed him from every direction. There was no chase. There was no gunfight. Lustig saw the agents and knew instantly that the game was over. He didn't run. He didn't panic. He simply smiled, adjusted his coat, and held out his hands for the handcuffs. He greeted the agents as if they were old friends he hadn't seen in years. When they searched him, they found no weapon. They found only a single, small key in his vest pocket. Lustig refused to say what had opened. The agents spent days testing it on every luggage locker in the city, until they finally found a match at the Times Square subway station. Inside the locker sat $51,000 in counterfeit bills and the plates used to print them. The king of cons was finally in a cage. But as they drove him to the Federal Detention House, the agents made a mistake. They thought they had captured a criminal. They forgot they were holding an escape artist. Chapter 7. The Federal Detention House in New York was known as the Tomb. It was a fortress of concrete and steel, designed to hold the most dangerous criminals in America. The warden personally visited Victor Lustig's cell to tell him that escape was impossible. Lustig looked at the thick bars and the armed guards and took that as a challenge. He didn't plan a violent riot. He didn't try to bribe a guard. He decided to walk out using nothing but laundry. He noticed a small flaw in the prison's routine. When the guards collected dirty bedsheets, they didn't count them. Over the course of a month, Lustig quietly stole a few sheets at a time, hiding them inside his mattress. At night, while the other prisoners slept, he tore the sheets into strips and braided them into a heavy rope. But having a rope wasn't enough. He needed a way out. He realized that the wire mesh covering the windows was old. He spent weeks sawing through the metal with a crude knife he had fashioned from a spoon. To hide the damage, he molded a mixture of bread and spit to look like the iron wire and painted it with shoe polish. On the morning of September 2, 1935, Lustig made his move. He didn't choose the middle of the night, he chose the middle of the day. He put on a pair of white trousers and a white shirt he had scavenged. He climbed out the window, 3 stories up, hanging over the busy street below. As he rappelled down the side of the building on his bedsheet rope, dozens of people on the sidewalk stopped and looked up. They pointed at the man hanging from the jail. Lustig didn't panic. He stopped halfway down. He took a white rag from his pocket and calmly started wiping the windows. The crowd on the street relaxed. They assumed he was just a window washer doing his job. They stopped looking and kept walking. Lustig hit the ground, dusted off his hands, and walked calmly into the crowd, vanishing into the city. He had just broken out of the most secure jail in New York without running, simply by acting like he belonged there. Victor Lustig enjoyed exactly 27 days of freedom. He spent them on the run, driving fast cars, and hiding in the shadows of Pittsburgh. But the embarrassment of his escape had turned the American government into a relentless machine. They weren't going to let him go again. On a cold night in Pittsburgh, Lustig was driving down a quiet street when the world exploded in light. FBI sedans swerved in front of him and behind him, boxing him in. Agents poured out with Thompson submachine guns drawn. There was no time to talk, no time to charm. They dragged him out of the car and threw him into the back of a van. This time, there was no trial in New York. The government sent him to the one place from which no one had ever escaped, Alcatraz. Lustig arrived at the Rock in San Francisco Bay on a foggy morning. He was stripped of his silk suits and his monocle. He was given a rough wool uniform and a number prisoner trecentos. The guards at Alcatraz didn't care about his title or his stories. To them, he wasn't a count. He was just another inmate in a cell block filled with the most violent men in America. Even in prison, the Count tried to play the game. He spread rumors that the mob was sending money to him. He tried to manipulate the guards, but the damp, cold air of the prison slowly destroyed his health. The man who had lived in the finest hotels in Paris and drank champagne with Al Capone was now rotting in a concrete box, coughing his lungs out. Victor Lustig died on March 11, 1947, of pneumonia. But he had one final trick left for history. When the prison clerk filled out his death certificate, he had to ask for the deceased's occupation. He didn't write criminal or prisoner on the official government document that marked the end of his life. Under occupation, it simply reads, salesman. It was the only honest thing ever written about him. He had sold a money box that didn't work, a stock scheme that didn't exist, and the Eiffel Tower twice. He proved that if you dress well, speak with confidence, and appeal to people's greed, you can sell them absolutely anything. The Count was gone, but the tower he sold is still standing, a permanent iron monument to the greatest lie ever told.